Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Foxworth Theory. I am your host, Eugenia Foxworth. Thank you for joining us. And this show is about arts, fashion, entertainment, and business. And we will bring to you the movers and the shakers from all over the world, and we allow them to tell their stories on the Foxworth Theory. This week, our guest is Lance Shipman Young, Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Chemistry at Morehouse College. He has served as a visiting scientist at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle, Washington, and he is a Louis Sigler Institute Fellow at Princeton University. Young has long been an advocate for education in STEM. Welcome to the show, Lance Shipman Young.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Now, to get started, where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in New Jersey. I grew up in East Orange and Newark, New Jersey. So a lot of my personality, I think, was developed as a Jersey boy. But I spent most of my formative years in the state of New Jersey before moving to Atlanta.
Thank you. Now, this question I have is for myself and my audience.
Okay.
Can you please explain to me about STEM? I'm sure my audience would like an explanation as well.
Sure. So STEM refers to a group of disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And at the core of all of those disciplines is investigation, understanding or using tools and methods to better understand the physical world around us. Another thing that underpins all of those disciplines is the use of evidence to ground our understanding of the physical world. So in a nutshell, that's just what it is. It's inquiry in order to understand how the world works.
Thank you so much, because the word STEM is the new buzzword
Mhm.
around these days. So, what were your toughest parts of your career?
Wow. That's a great question. I have to say that my career has been difficult only in the sense that investigation usually leads to roadblocks, things that we don't quite understand, and it can sometimes be frustrating when you are in the midst of experiments and the answers don't come readily. But I must say that almost everything that I've done throughout my career has been rewarding because, in some sense, it has added to our knowledge and our understanding of the world around us. More concretely, I will tell you that the biggest challenge certainly was graduate school. So pursuing my PhD in biological chemistry at Texas A&M, as probably any graduate student would tell you, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of challenge there, and just asking yourself the question: do I have the mettle to finish this program, to actually become a respected scientist in my field? So that was the most difficult part, but I'm happy to say that I was able to endure and build a pretty successful career as a result.
As I have read, and it's amazing, your career, amazing. Now, what is the most troubling part of medical research? Do research studies include people of color more today than ever?
That is a fantastic question. I will tell you that one of the reasons that I moved into research was to try to fill a gap. It was certainly the case in the late 80s and 90s that there was a real need to have more people of color, specifically African Americans, enter the research disciplines. There were questions about whether or not we were at the table when research studies were being designed, whether or not we were ethically recruited and treated as subjects within those studies. So I think many people are aware of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. That has really clouded the perception for a lot of people of color about the interaction between science and communities of color. Having read the book Bad Blood when I was a student at Morehouse, which dealt with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, I, like a lot of my colleagues who were emerging as practitioners in STEM disciplines, decided never again, that we would, not idly stand by and watch these things happen when we could have a hand in kind of deciding how future studies would be done. And we would be able to inform the body of knowledge in the sciences in general. So I think a really great example of that is the development of the mRNA vaccines that are being used against COVID-19. So I think it's important to flush out, because there is a lot of doubt within our communities about the safety of those vaccines, that one of the prime investigators who was able to bring that technology to the forefront was a woman of color, an African-American woman. So I like to think that, we're part of a community that's changing the landscape of how science is done, how experiments are carried out. And we want to be at the vanguard of building or rebuilding trust within our community, so that, science isn't this specter, but it is something that is respected as a tool that can really aid and improve society.
And I'm glad to hear you mentioned the woman of color who was an African American woman, if I'm not correct. But very few people know about her. I think during Women's History Month, one of the major TV shows put her out there, but that was it. It was like,
Mhm.
and all. But thank you for bringing that to our audience. Now,
Sure.
what do you think about the COVID pandemic? What facts do we need to know that the authorities have not told us about?
Excellent question. There's a lot. There's a lot. So I'm happy to report that it looks like we are on at the end, or coming close to the end. So I don't want to build a false sense of confidence among audience members. So we are still in the midst of this pandemic. So let me be very clear about that. But there are encouraging signs. So it does look like the cases are beginning to decline, hospitalizations and resulting deaths. Those are all starting to show really encouraging signs of decline. But at the same time, we still have to protect ourselves. So I think in certain settings, particularly when you're indoors and in the company of other individuals for whom we're not sure of their vaccination status, of their infection status, I think it's really important to continue to wear masks. That is for those who are vaccinated and for those who are not vaccinated. Speaking in that regard, I think it's also important that we try to encourage as many people as possible to get vaccinated, not just the first two shots if it's the mRNA vaccines, or the one shot if it's the Janssen vaccine, but to make sure that we are getting boosters. So the best level of protection that we can provide is the vaccine at this point. And the more people who are vaccinated and protected, the better of a wall of protection we build around those who are not. And ultimately, that is what is going to get us to the other side of this pandemic.
Yes, and now they're getting a fourth vaccine. I just left Europe, and some countries require that you have the fourth vaccine.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. So with the requirement, so this is I guess a touchy subject for many, right? Because we as Americans tend to entertain this conversation around our personal freedoms, and that's always juxtaposed. That's always pushed up against public health interests, right? There's a new conversation that's taking place now that perhaps was not as prevalent in previous public health threats, where there is a lot of pushback against public health measures. So the recommendations from the CDC to mask up and to get vaccinated, there's a lot of pushback against those things now. But the evidence is pretty compelling that our best protection again is vaccination. And I'm glad that you mentioned the fourth shot, because it is every pathogen is different, right? So the virus that causes COVID-19 is one that it looks like we're going to have to continually protect ourselves against. And that means more regular booster shots than perhaps we would see in the case of another infectious agent. And that's okay, right? So I think most people are able to tolerate the vaccine. So if we have to go to 6 months or a year for booster shots. For most people, that's going to be tolerable. And again, best thing we can do is to protect ourselves against infection in order to protect those who can't even get vaccinated, like the immunocompromised.
Yes, which is good, that you mentioned um, this because I know I am in New York and I know a lot of people who did not get vaccinated. And um, and I understand it's from the research that was done many years ago on our Black military men. So we understand that. But I want to make something a little lighter.
Okay.
Um, when you were a child, since you have been involved in science since you can remember, did you begin playing with those little plastic magnifying glasses and chemical sets, or were you much more mature than that?
No, I can't say I was more mature. In fact, I always wanted to have those play sets, those chemical sets. I did have magnifying glasses, but I was a bit more resourceful. So I would do experiments on things that I would find around the house, which got me in a lot of trouble sometimes. And I would not encourage that for sure for for the average individual. So mixing household chemicals is definitely a dangerous thing to do. But I was just curious about how things worked, and left to my own devices, sometimes I would just take things apart. So mechanical devices, I would take them apart and try to rebuild them. Oftentimes, just trying to do little experiments to see if I can get things to change colors on my own. So yeah, those kits were always something on my Christmas wish list. But I used to just kind of make experiments of my own.
And I understand because before black pepper spray and all, I remember friends used to mix certain chemicals together, which were natural. Things that we eat, certain herbs they would put together, and it would burn more than the black pepper. I think there were
Mhm.
three things that they put in it. I'm not going to say it because I know kids will probably try it. But I mean, they're natural, but when you got it in your eyes, it would bring you to your knees.
Mhm.
And I was one of those, but I did not do that, but I was with those geeks, as they called it,
Understood.
during that time. So, anyway, let's take a short break and we will be right back with our very special guest, Lance Shipman Young. Thank you for joining us on the Foxworth Theory. Be sure to tune in on Thursday at 9 p.m. on the Foxworth Theory Network.